Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is how we greet people in my part of the world, and it means peace be upon you all. 2 days ago, Judy invited us for dinner at her home, us and all the rest of the fellows. And she shared with us photos and memories from her grandparents and her husband's grandparents' exodus from Europe after World War II. The stories that she shared reminded me, the stories of displacement that she shared reminded me of my own father's displacement and his own stories. We actually, the Dajani family, comes from Jerusalem in Palestine. We've been there for at least 500 years. And this is the tombstone of one of my ancestors who was born in 1459. And that's a shield of armor for our family. And that's a group photo of the extended family back in 1940s. And this is our compound, the Dajani compound. We were the caretakers of one of the ancient gates of Jerusalem from the ancient city. But unfortunately, in 1948, Zionists took over my family home, and my father and his family had to flee to Lebanon at that time and haven't been able to go back. They carry with them the photos, the keys for their homes, and they're not alone. There were at least 700,000 people who flee then. So I felt so much compatibility with Judy's story, and it made me reflect on displacement and what does it mean to us. And I think that feeling of displacement pushes me to explore what does belonging mean. And I think through different series of events, it's what ended with me here today in front of you to share my journey and my story. And not to spare you anything from Jerusalem, I brought with me today some sweets. So this is a sweet shop that was established in Jerusalem in 1860. It's called Zalatimo. Luckily, they opened a shop in Jordan, so I was in Jordan, and I brought them with me, so I hope you'll enjoy them after the talk. So my talk is entitled 5 Scarves. And I say 5 scarves, what I mean is 5 hats. You know, the metaphor, you wear a hat, you wear multiple hats, you have different careers or different roles you play in life. So I don't wear hats, I wear scarves. So that's why I'm going to tell you the 5 scarves I wear as I go through my talk. My talk is divided into 3 parts. Part 1 will be how the story started. Part 2, the main theme of the book. And then part 3, the unanswered questions that I hope you will help me answer during our Q&A. As human beings, we enjoy stories. We love to listen to stories. And I think this is part of our evolution. So through ancient history, as humans evolved, probably there were 2 groups of people. A group of people that sat around the fire and read stories, and another group of people who did not sit around telling stories. They were more serious, and they frowned upon those who sat around reading stories. And you can imagine which one of those groups survived today. It's the storytellers. So apparently, storytelling is essential for our survival as a species to cope with this world. So in the spirit of evolution, I'm going to share with you my story and how it brought me here to Radcliffe. So my journey starts 4 decades ago. I come from a family of 8 girls, and I'm the eldest. And we had a boy in the end, but there's a 20-year difference between him and I, so I don't consider he's part of the family at this point. We grew up, there was no TV by choice, and so we read a lot. We read different stories and novels, and we read National Geographic and Scientific American. And we actually did a lot of role-playing, to the extent that sometimes we mistook the book for real life, many, many times. You know, we're 8 girls, different ages, sizes, so we could do that. And we also had many debates and discussions at home, between us, the girls, and with my parents, both my mother and father. And this is what fostered in us curiosity, asking questions, and not letting ourselves to be comfortable with anything that was not less than logical in the way we approach things. I also learned 3 lessons in that period of my life, which stemmed from my upbringing, my culture, and my religion. And those were, 1, that you have a responsibility towards your community. You have to do something for your community. You can't just, enjoy life by yourself. And the second lesson is that we are responsible for our time, to do something good with our time and not to spend it without meaning. And the third lesson was, it doesn't matter if you succeed. What matters is that you try. That's the important thing. So those lessons are what I carried along with me in life and helped me in what I did eventually. Now, in Jordan, if your father's a physician, you go and study medicine. It's expected of you. And I think to a certain extent it is in many cultures. So my father was a physician, and therefore I was going to study medicine. After I went into my first year at college, I decided I don't want to do medicine because I was scared. I was scared of making a mistake and killing someone by mistake. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to be a biologist, a scientist, and if I make a mistake, it'll be with mice or worms or flies, and I could sleep if I made a mistake with them. And even as a scientist, I could still serve humanity through my research, through discovering the reasons behind disease, how proteins communicate, how cells talk to each other. So I studied biology, and I wanted to be a scientist. Now, when you choose to study something because you love it, you excel in it, and work becomes play. You know, Einstein said, choose the easiest path, that way you enjoy every day, and every day is a play day. And actually, I chose biology because to me it was the easiest, and I love it, and to me every day is a play day. I don't consider my work as work. I also graduated from college, and then I went and did my master's. But in Jordan, there's no PhD programs back in the 1980s. And so there was no internet either. So if you wanted to study abroad, you'd have to send a letter and wait for 3 weeks, and send another letter and wait for 3 weeks, and you didn't know what were the ranges of scholarships available. I was not able to go because I didn't get a scholarship. I actually got accepted at Cambridge University eventually, but I didn't have the financial money to actually go there. And by then I was married and I had one child, and my advisor then at Cambridge University told me, Rana, you can't come and do your PhD with one child. Later on I did it with 4, but he doesn't know. So the first scarf that I like to say proudly I wear is the one that I'm a mother of 4 children. And so I like to wear my scarf that I'm the mother of 4 children. Now they're all grown up, of course. This is a picture a long time ago. Now meanwhile, since I couldn't become a scientist, I became a teacher. So everybody who studies science in Jordan, if you're not an academic, you become a teacher. So I was a teacher for 10 years, and I taught elementary school, high school, from grade 1 to grade 12. I taught biology, science, and English and Arabic, all different types of programs. And I think that period of my life helped me understand what are the challenges that children face in their everyday lives, what are the challenges that teachers face in their everyday life, and how important the job of the teacher, and how we as a community don't give enough importance for the teacher. And I always say, if I ever become a minister of education, the first thing I will do is to make it compulsory for every college graduate to teach for 1 year. It's like, you know, military obligation. You have to do that. And the reason is, if they do it, they realize how difficult and important is the job and the role of the teacher, because she or he are bringing up the next generation. Well, as I was teaching, my husband saw an ad in the newspaper that the Fulbright was offering PhD programs. And so he said, Rana, there's your chance, because my dream is still to be a scientist. So I actually, at the age of 30, took my GRE exams all over again, wrote essays all over again, and I was called for an interview the day before my last daughter was due. And I told them, but tomorrow's my due date, and they said, oh, you know, if you have the baby, you could call us from your hospital bed. I didn't have the baby, and the baby's actually sitting here in front, Sarah, she's my last one. And I went to the interview, made the interview, I got the scholarship, and now the decision was, what do we do? This is a family, a full family of 4 kids, from 0 to 10 years old. And we were thinking, what do we do? Do I take the kids and go? Does my husband keep the kids in Jordan? I go by myself. This is a PhD in molecular biology. It's a 5-year commitment. And at that point, my husband, who was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, he said, Rana, I'm going to resign. So he resigned, so that we could keep the whole family together. And we went as a 1 unit to the US so that we could take care of the kids together, make sure that they had a healthy home with both parents there to take care of them. So my husband has been my mentor, my friend, and supporting me in everything I do all along. So when we went to the States, first of all, I made it very clear to my advisor that my family is as important as my research. And if, you know, push comes to shove, my kids come first. So I always left at 5. I never came in on weekends. And yet, I graduated similar to my peers who didn't have kids, who were single, who stayed all night in the lab and all weekends. So it's about time management, knowing how to do things in the right way and setting your priorities right. And at home, actually, my kids, I trained them. They did all the chores. They did all the dinners. Many times, if I had an exam, I would come home to find a 6-course dinner done by my son, not my daughters, or a pie coming out of the oven, very hot because I had an exam or something. And not just that, I actually involved them in my work. So every time I'd go home and share my experiments and my results, and they'd come up with hypotheses. So when Mama was late, she was testing their hypotheses. So they were really excited. And they made friends with all my mice. And of course, I was not allowed to kill them until after, I had to beg them that I had to do it, and I would explain why. And actually, they all have acknowledgments in my publications for being part of my research. But that led to them being immune to anything scientific. So none of them went to science at all. They're all into the humanities. They've had enough growing up with being a scientist. And this is them celebrating with me. They put me this big card that I just won a PhD, as if you win it. It's a lot that we worked hard. So then after that, we went back to Jordan. And in Jordan, I started at the university my work. At the same time, when you change from one country to one country or from one culture to another culture, you realize that there's something different. Things that you didn't notice before, you notice again, either bad or good. And that's when I noticed that children in Jordan don't read for pleasure. So they read for education, they read for religious purposes. But when you speak about reading for pleasure, under the covers, you can't wait to finish the story, that kind of reading. And that kind of reading is very, very important, because when you read for pleasure, this boosts your imagination, your creativity. You gain vocabulary, and this vocabulary helps you express yourself better, and you become less violent. You learn about other cultures, so this develops your empathy to understand others, listen to others, and communicate better with others. And you become more confident because you draw from the heroes you read about the courage to make a difference in your own life. So reading for pleasure is very, very important. And I was looking around, and especially like in Jordan and Arab countries, Islam is the majority religion, and in Islam the first word of the Quran is read. So to me the question is, why don't we read for pleasure? And I did some research, and I found out that the reason we don't read for pleasure is because we don't love to read. There's no passion, there's no this burning need and desire that I want to read. And also I did some research to understand, how do we plant that love of reading? How do we make people love to read? And I found out, although many people thought it was because they don't have enough books, I found out that was not the main reason. The main reason that children don't love to read is because their parents don't read aloud to them when they're very young. You should even read to your child as early as when the mother's pregnant. Because what happens, that in the brain of the child, there becomes a connection between the feeling of security, happiness, and comfort with reading. So you grow up, you want to be a reader because it gives you this good sense, this sense of happiness, security, that you don't know where it comes from. So I found the solution to make children love to read. So what did I do at that time? I mean, it's impossible to go around and tell every parent you have to read aloud to your children. That's too much. And even if I told the government to pass a law, that doesn't mean they're gonna follow the law. So I felt this huge responsibility, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna gather the children in my neighborhood and read aloud to them. And that's what we did. It was a family project. My husband and children were involved, and we started reading in the mosque because it's in every neighborhood. And we thought, why not? It's clean, it's got a carpet, it's got a bathroom. And the first time we announced that there's going to be a read aloud, the parents dragged their children to come and attend because they heard in the announcement reading, education, mosque, religion. This is great. The children didn't want to come, of course, but because we're very obedient, they all came. But when they come, I bring funny stories from their culture, from their everyday life in their native tongue, and the children just fell in love with the stories. And then they line up and take the books home, and they start becoming the champions of reading within their own homes, begging their parents to read to them, or themselves reading to their peers or their siblings. And so a culture of reading for pleasure started to grow in my neighborhood. And the program, we called it We Love Reading, and it began to grow. So we created a training program for women and then later men as well. And we started developing our own stories for children in Arabic. And the program flourished and spread, as Judy said, now it's actually to 35 countries and counting. And we base all our programming on research because I'm a scientist. So we involved Yale University, Harvard University, Chicago University, and Brown, and we did studies on different aspects of the program to make sure that what we're doing is right and how we can develop it even better. And I'm going to show you a short video of We Love Reading and how it has spread and has been so effective specifically in refugee contexts, where the children are in need of an education program that they can engage in even if there's no school, and where adults need a purpose and agency in their lives. Because in We Love Reading, the adults are all volunteers. We don't pay them. And they only do it not because they do it for me or for the program. They actually read aloud to the children for their own good, for their own community. So it's sustainable in that sense and gives them agency and ownership. So enjoy. So this actual video, the music for it was made by a Syrian composer who used to be one of my students when I was a teacher. So the second scarf is I was a teacher. That's my role. And the third one, because I forgot to talk about that one, is that I'm a social entrepreneur because of We Love Reading. So those are my third one. Now, meanwhile, I was actually, I had a lab that I was taking care of, and I had research. So what I did, I established my lab, and in coming back to Jordan from doing a PhD and conducting research in a high-tech environment, I had to find my own question and find my own research that I could compete internationally and produce good science within the constraints, whether it's funding or bureaucracy that existed in my country. And I'm not alone. This is in all developing countries. So I had to look around, what is it that I could give that's not found in any other part of the world? And at that time, the Human HapMap project was coming out, and Decode, if people are familiar with it, it's an Icelandic company that was coming out doing genome-wide association studies, discovering one gene after another as novel risk factors for diabetes, for schizophrenia, for cancer, and so on. So that got me thinking that in Jordan, we actually have two ethnic populations that immigrated from southern Russia. They are the Chechens and the Circassians. 150 years ago, when they were persecuted for their religion, and they either fled or died or were deported to Siberia. So these two populations actually came to Jordan and settled in Jordan, and they maintained their isolation by marrying only within each other. So I thought, I have a gold treasure in my backyard. So I started collecting and doing sweeps studies both anthropology, epidemiology, and genetics on these two populations. And we created a DNA data bank. And we became the experts for those two populations in the world because nobody else had studied them so extensively. And just because they've been in Jordan for 150 years is not enough to change any genetics because so the gene pool with them is pretty homogeneous. And last year, we got a call from Berkeley, from Rasmus Nielsen's lab, who studies human migration out of Africa, asking us to contribute and collaborate with him with our DNA so that he could add it to the pool of DNA of humans migrating out of Africa. And we actually submitted our work to Nature. We got the second round of reviewers, which is very positive. So we're excited that we're going to be publishing in Nature, although we're just a small lab in Jordan with minimum resources. But this is about asking the right question at the right time. And then because we have this DNA data bank, we started studying what other complex diseases we could study in these two populations. So I chose to study diabetes because it doesn't have a stigma for an ethnic population. And we actually discovered novel genetic risk factors and copy number variances in these populations that we just published earlier this year. And this led us that we wanted to identify those genetic risk factors in those populations. We wanted to express them in cells and stem cells so that we can understand what is their function and how that contributes to the mechanism of development of diabetes. However, to do that, we had to deal with stem cells. And that's when I came back to Jordan after getting that training on how to do induced pluripotent stem cells, that I wanted to make sure ethically that it's okay for me to do that, or if I wanted to use human embryonic stem cells. And that's when we created a committee in Jordan from theologians, scientists, physicians, lawyers, to explore what is allowed and what is not allowed for research and later for therapy. And we passed a law, which was the first law in the region, that allowed us to use human embryonic stem cells up to the age of 5 days, which is enough to actually make a human embryonic stem cell line. So this was very progressive for us, considering the environment that was going around, where in the States it wasn't allowed for a certain period of time, or in other countries. And lastly, because as a scientist, we hold a responsibility to our communities and to our societies. With the Syrian crisis spilling over to Jordan and other countries, I started thinking, what can I do as a scientist to help the people around us? And so I started looking on how does the trauma affect the children, the youth, and the adults, and how is that effect only physiological and mental health, and can it be transmitted to other generations, which brought me to the field of epigenetics. And just to give you briefly, epigenetics is like something that happens to you in your environment. In this picture, it's the mother smoking, but you can imagine the trauma of war compared to smoking, and how that trauma not just only affects the body of the individual who's being exposed to the trauma directly, but it also affects the fetus inside her. And if that fetus is a female, it actually affects the reproductive cells inside the fetus, inside the mother. So the effects are intergenerational. And like my daughter likes to remind me, it's the immortal kiss of grandparents that affects us in the end. So we hope that this research, which is very new, where we're comparing multiple generations and looking at the genetics and the signature of the trauma, to help maybe develop programs to help the children exposed or their grandparents exposed. Now, so this, of course, this is my fourth scarf, right? I'm the scientist. Now the problems I faced as a scientist in Jordan were not specific to me as a woman. There were challenges that affected everybody, male and female. And this is not just for Jordan, for all developing countries, whether it's bureaucracy or lack of funding, and so on. So I wrote an article in Nature 2 weeks ago as an essay describing the challenges that we face and giving solutions. That it's not about just the resources inside our country. Many times it's also the nations that actually fund us or send us money. That sometimes they send us the money without understanding what are the dynamics inside the country. And the solution is that we need to sit together on a table for us to describe to them what our problems are, and for them to come up with solutions or conditions as donors to make things happen more efficiently. However, as a woman scientist, I do experience challenges, and these are not unique to me in Jordan. They are similar to other challenges that women face across the world, even in the US, and across careers, not just as scientists, as lawyers, as bankers, as business people. And I did two things to address that. One is, I think that there are many successful women that we don't know about, we don't read about, we don't learn about. And if we brought those to the forefront more by writing their stories, I think more people will be aware and more girls will be encouraged to do science and more boys will respect women scientists or women in other careers. The second thing I did is I developed a mentoring network. And the reason I did it is because as mothers, we do our work because we enjoy it. I enjoy my science very much. But at the same time, I enjoy my children. So I don't have time for the side talk, the coffee talk, to know what's going on, what's the next conference, and so on. So through this mentoring network, we paired females together in a way they would help each other in a holistic approach, both professionally and personally. And then we called it the 3 circles of Alimat, as you can see. And Alimat means female scientist in Arabic, so that speaks to the history of the presence of female scientists throughout the years. And we envisioned it as in this cartoon where seeds of pairs actually help each other to grow shoots and roots, and then these shoots and roots grow up to be trees that produce new seeds, and so on and so forth. So it's like a cycle. And this mentoring toolkit that we developed is already free online for anybody to use it. And it's not just for females, actually males can use it. And it's not just for scientists, it could be for any walk of life. And you could be a member of any organization, you could go take the mentoring toolkit, apply it within your organization. It's a step-by-step guide. And because we wanted to promote this all over the world, we produced this video as an inspiration for female scientists and mentoring.
The world needs us because we are scientists, teachers, artists. We are in all walks of life. We are also the daughters, the wives, the mothers. And above all, we are humans. Humans need to question and be questioned, to think, to share thoughts and emotions, to spread knowledge. We create networks to experience moments, a sense of togetherness and joy. 3 circles of Alimat exists because humans are determined to make it into this world. So, shall we start?
Which brings me to the second part of my talk, which is the main theme of the book that I'm writing while I'm here at Radcliffe. And this actually starts with another story, which is a few years ago, I got an email from an organization based in Britain called Muslim Science, where they had chosen 20 female scientists from the Islamic world, which is about 1.6 billion, as female scientists who have had an impact on the world. And I was one of them. And that was great, thank you very much. And I was scrolling down to read the rest of the email, and they had given a title for each one of us. So the mathematician, the cardiologist, the change maker, and things like that. And as I was scrolling down to find out what was my title, I found out that my title was the Islamic feminist. And when they told me that, when I read that, I said, that's impossible, because when you say Islamic, all the Western world looks at you with suspicion. And when you say feminist, all the Eastern world looks at you with suspicious, and so I lost on both accounts. And I emailed them, I explained that to them. They said, no, when you write, I write a lot, this is what you are. And since then, I've been trying to own the term, own the identity, own the title, redefine it, give it a new meaning that fits with what I am. And that's what made me want to write a book to explore what this is. So and that's actually the 5th scarf, right? They call me the Islamic feminist. I didn't want this, I didn't work for it, it was given to me. So that's the 5th scarf. Now, so I wanted to explore. So the first thing that I realized around me as I was exploring, that the rhetoric around the world is that there are not enough women in the workforce, that half the population is not being utilized, that the economy is being affected. And if we had more women in the workforce, the economy would increase. And we have all these statistics showing the different percentages of females around the world. But then I was reading a book. And in this book, I read an excerpt that was very, very interesting and moving that I want to share with you. And it's a very nice story. that I hope you'll enjoy as I read it to you. Tomorrow, I will do the unthinkable. Once again, I will pass over a newborn. My heart will break. I'm told to toughen up. I'm reminded that I should be thankful that I have a job. Tomorrow morning, I will race around the house to ensure that I can do as much as possible for my children before leaving for work. And despite the fact that I am just one of hundreds of thousands of working mothers who must do what they have to do for their family, my heart breaks as I know they too are suffering and aching for their baby. Hard work? I'm not afraid of that. We are your typical middle-class family. My husband and I both have good jobs. We work hard and we provide a roof over our children's heads, warm beds to sleep, and full tummies every night. Our children have everything they need. But if you ask what our children want most, they'll tell you, us. They want their mommy. Tomorrow, I will wipe away tears, pull toddlers off of my legs, unclench tiny little fingers from around my neck, and pass over a very new baby. I will not be able to kiss boo-boos that happen throughout the day. I will not be able to lay babies down for their naps. I will not be able to feed my newborn when she cries for me. Once again, I will have to try to pretend mommy isn't hurting or an emotional wreck inside, and make my best attempt to put on a brave face for the sake of my babies. But knowing myself, no matter how courageous I strive to be, undoubtedly, tears will stream down my face. I have such trouble wrapping my head around the thought and accepting the fact that my role as a mother is not valued by society, that I don't have the freedom to decide what is important and what is valued. After I finished reading that story, I was reminded by a paragraph from John Green's The Fault in Our Stars. I don't know if you've read the book, but in his book he says, sometimes you read a book and it fills you with this weird evangelical zeal, and you become convinced that the shattered world will never be put back again together unless and until all living humans read the book. That's how I felt when I read that excerpt, and that's why I wanted to share it with you. And as John Green also said, I'm on a roller coaster that only goes up, going from there. So from there, I started exploring. And the first thing I did is I wanted to try to understand the dilemma, where on one hand, people were telling me there's not enough women in the workforce, we need to get more women in. And on the other hand, I read about this woman, how she feels. So what's right and what's wrong, and what should we do as a society? So that was my question that I wanted to answer. And at that point, I got an Eisenhower Fellowship, and I used the fellowship to actually interview hundreds of women from different cultures, different backgrounds, and different career paths to try to understand and unpack that question. And I asked them a series of questions, amongst which were, what does success mean to you? If you were a man, would you choose the same career path? And things like that. And these will be the essence of my book that I'm writing now at the Radcliffe. And so I'm going to give you some of my results, and I'm going to focus on the science, women in science more, because that's my background. But I think that the results and the findings will be applicable to all fields and all careers. So if we look at women in science, similarly, we have very low numbers compared to men, and this is all over the world, as this data shows us. Of course, it's great for the US. You don't have data for the US. I wonder why. I don't know. And then, so if you look at the trajectory, and this is reporting for the Western world, you see that the percentages of males, which is in blue, as you go through the education stage, you know, high school, bachelor's degree, PhD, and then research careers, the percentages of males are always pretty high. And then when you go to the females, the percentages start going down. And to me, the first thing that comes to my mind to explain this, which is the first hypothesis. So I tried to address this issue as a scientific problem. As a scientist. So I just want to put a disclaimer here that I'm not a social scientist. I'm not an education specialist. I'm just coming at this as a scientist, thinking that this really matters, and I have to do something about it. And I think as scientists, we play sometimes roles outside of our science, outside of our labs and classrooms that we owe to society, because I think society is kind of already bored from civic society and from religious readers preaching, and they're thirsty for a different kind of role model to look up to and to listen to. And we know that our students listen to us as scientists, so we have something that we can give. So my first hypothesis was, maybe we don't have enough women in the workforce because women are not educated enough. And this is a lot of rhetoric going around. And in this graph here, it seems that women are not educated enough, as you can see, because the percentages are like 32% and then 25% in a PhD level. But when I look in Jordan, I found that the statistics are very different. In Jordan, we have 64% female in bachelor's degree. And actually in biology, my class has 90% females. Pharmacy, it's almost 90% females as well. And if we go to the master's degree, it's 57%. PhD, it's 56%. So apparently, it's not about education. If in Jordan, where we even have less women in the workforce, we have more educated women. So I crossed out that hypothesis, applying the scientific method. And I drew my line, which is the red line, where no, we're highly educated as females, and that could not be the reason or the prime reason that we have less women in the workforce. So the second hypothesis is, maybe the workforce is not comfortable and flexible for women, right? And we, I don't know if I'm ruining this. I'm going to take these off, sorry. And yes, we have less women in the workforce also in Jordan. And this is some data showing that we have 23% female in research careers in Jordan. But this hypothesis didn't hold up either, because McKinsey has been producing report after report showing that even after you introduce measures in the workplace to make it more easier and flexible for women, such as nurseries or flexible hours or a little bit more extended maternity leave, not much in the US, still the percentages of women remained low. So that crossed out my second hypothesis. And I started thinking, wait a minute, as scientists, you ask yourself, you keep questioning yourself, maybe I'm asking the wrong question, right? Maybe it's not how can we get more women in the workforce. And I think, and what I came up with is a paradigm shift. Rather than asking how to get more women into the workforce, we should be asking, what do women really want? How do women define success? Did anybody ask us what we really wanted before going around saying we have to have more of women in the workforce? So I think this is an innovative approach, and I started trying to find evidence for that approach, again, as a third hypothesis. So I start from looking at men and women in the West. So there's a fight for equality in the West that we all are familiar with, which started with feminism in the last century. And it was always about women wanting to be equal to men. If a man drives a truck, I want to drive a truck. If a man carries a bag of flour that's very heavy, I'm going to do that, right? We're equal. And we were trying to fit into one mold of success, into one definition, which is this framework, this very crude, vulgar framework of what success means that was defined by men in the workforce. So we were trying to fit into that, and there was only one. To the extent that we were denying ourselves who we are as females biologically. And I'm sure many of you heard how Facebook and Google offered to freeze eggs for women till they were over the age of 40. To me, that's making me more fit into that mold, into that definition. And the consequences of such actions were, well, you still had less females in the workforce. That didn't improve. And those who were struggling always, similar to the story I just read you. Or many just didn't get married or didn't have children because we only had one framework, which was made by men for men. And also, if a woman stayed at home or chose to, she was frowned upon. And if you acted as a mom at work, you were not serious enough. Now, that's fine if it stayed in one country. The problem is it was being exported all over the world. And that's when I felt the problem, right? That there's something going wrong when my students started talking about such things. Especially when we look at my part of the world, in our rich civilization and history, where actually we had Fatima al-Fihri, who built the first university in 1859, which is still existing today in Morocco. While in 1821, we know that females in Britain, people questioned if they had a soul. They were not allowed to be educated. They weren't allowed to have their own ownership and their own property, when we had those luxuries and privileges 1,000 years before. So with this importation to other countries, this was oppression at a grand scale. Not to say that we have our problems in my part of the world. People have forgotten what Islam really means, and we see the consequences around us. But we were getting a double oppression, right? The oppression from not understanding our religion properly and being oppressed because of tribalism, and then oppression by importing ideas from the West that didn't quite fit who we are. So I wanted to approach this as a biologist. So I said, look, let's look at evolution of the species. Evolution, we evolved as a species to have male and female. And each one, we're both the same species we're all human, Homo sapiens, but we evolved to have slightly different roles, right? So as a female, I evolved to, I have a womb, I'm going to carry the fetus, I'm going to nurse, breastfeed the child. The man doesn't do that. The male part of my species doesn't do that. So I envisioned if we have differences physiologically, I'm assuming we should have some differences in how we define success. And I envisioned this, that our definition of success will be as diverse and as colorful as the ceiling. Anybody knows what the ceiling is? Grasta Familia in Barcelona, as beautiful as that, and as diverse as that, and as diverse as our DNA. And so we may come up with a range of definitions of success, what it means to us as females, whether it's how senior we are and how much money we earn, which is more similar to what men define as success, or success to us could be just, enjoying having a child and bringing up the next generation, and anything in between. And we don't have to stick to one. It could be a zigzag, right? We go in and out, we change. Our priorities change with different times in our lives, with different environments, with different needs. So we could have, our definition of success is having a child at one stage, and then at another stage it's no, I want to, be the best scientist in my field, and so on. And this graph comes from a study that was done by MIT, where they compared male graduates to female graduates, and they followed them in their career paths. And I don't know if you can guess which was the male. The males are the ones that went up on a tangent, right, but then they plateaued at age 40. That was it. But for females, it was zigzag, and they kept going up. And so this speaks to the skills that a woman gains through her life by taking care of her family, that she keeps on going if she trusts herself enough and community does. And also there's an added component of social compassion that females have that pushes them to do more and to choose those fields where she feels she has an impact. Not to say that this will not benefit men. Not every man wants to be the highest earner and the leader. Many men also want to have new definitions of success. So this is not just for females, by the way. This will benefit all humans for them to identify what they want and what they consider successful. Now, this becomes very important when I'm talking about valuing other than just leadership positions and career paths. When I say that we need to value our children and the upbringing of our children as a role that females and males should play in the lives of their children, especially in the first 5 years. So there's a lot of data coming out showing that the child's brain, as it develops, those neurons, they create connections with each other. And these connections, if you don't use them, you're going to lose them. And how do you use them? It's by interacting with the environment around you. And when a child interacts with the environment around him or her, it's not just about food and shelter and cleanliness. It's about the social interaction. And what better social interaction than with the mother and the father, the biological mother and father, who actually brought them up, who's going to give them the full attention. And any neglect, however slight, will have an effect on our children. And this is an example of true brains where one is a normal one with parents who are around and taking care of the child, and another one, the second one, is of extreme neglect. And we have examples from the Romanian orphanage, I don't know if you've heard about it, where children were given everything they need in terms of shelter and food, and cleanliness, but there was no social interaction whatsoever. And these children grew up to have extreme social problems, even mental problems as well. So what is more important than to spend those important years of our children's lives where the mother and the father are there with them? And nobody can substitute a parent, but anybody can substitute you at work, and work can wait until you bring up the next generation. So how do we solve this? So all the people I've interviewed tell me, yeah, we agree with you, Rana, but what do we do? First is that we need to know ourselves. We need to feel comfortable with who we are. We need to know our identities. And then we need to educate ourselves and read and learn so that we know what are the options in front of us when we give the decision to our young generation to decide what a success means to them. We need them to find their passion. And then after they find their passion, to pursue it, to teach them the entrepreneurial skills so that they can pursue that passion. And this becomes even more relevant in a world of underemployment. Whether in the US or in Jordan or in many parts of the world, unemployment is on the rise. And there's not enough jobs. So when you become an entrepreneur, you're actually creating new jobs. So this is something that's very much needed and gives you the opportunity to explore that new field. But most importantly, after you know who you are, you educate yourself, you find your passion, and you have the skills to pursue it, most importantly, society should give us the freedom to choose what we want to be. whether it's men or women. And I think it's oppression if I tell women you have to go to work, and it's oppression if I tell a woman you have to stay at home. It's about trusting her to choose what she wants because she knows better. And of course, here I am talking about what women should choose as success from a platform of privilege. All of us are privileged here because I speak and think of all the women refugees around the world, whether it's in Syria or Palestine or Myanmar or Yemen, who don't have the opportunities we have and don't have the choices. They're not grappling with these choices that we are. But in order to help them, we have to start helping ourselves. And change takes a long time. The road of 1,000,000 miles starts with the small or the first step. And we should always start small, because a lot of people don't do things. They think they have to change the world first, or it has to be huge or big. No, you can start from your own neighborhood, from your own community, your own family, yourself. And I like to compare this to the physics theory, the chaos theory. When a butterfly flutters its wings in China, there's a hurricane in the Atlantic. So whatever good you do or whatever effort you try, it will have an impact sometime, someplace. And everybody's waiting. Everybody's thirsty for change and innovation. And I always like to end with Dr. Seuss, Oh, the Places You'll Go. I'm sure you've read the book many times. And in the last page, he says, and will you succeed? Yes, he answers, you will indeed. 98.75% guaranteed. Kid, you'll move mountains. And I'm going to end with this 1-minute video. You know, they tell you words are better, pictures are better than words, and movies are better than pictures. So don't wait. Yeah, just jump in, be innovative. Don't care what other people tell you or comment on you. So that's the end of my story. And I urge you during the reception to draw what success means to you. So we have some crayons and some paper out there. And if you could add on, you don't have to put your name, but if you tell us where you're from, your age range roughly, and your career, so we can maybe make an exhibit next year at Radcliffe of what success means from different perspectives. And that leads me to part 3, the unanswered questions, which would be your role to ask questions and to challenge me, because I'm here to learn and to listen and to together to make a difference. Thank you very much.